Welcome to EVONA Origin Stories, the space podcast where we bring you extraordinary leaders from within the sector as we explore their fascinating stories of early life, career, and how they broke into the space industry. As a recent graduate from the University of Kansas looking for work, Steve Nixon picked up the phone book and dialed the US Secretary of Defense. Flash forwards a few redirected calls, he landed his first job as an aircraft program budget analyst at the Pentagon. 7 years on, he set his sights on a role at Congress for the US House Committee on Appropriations, where he became immersed in the world of space. All thanks to that initial phone call, Steve went on to be named one of the top 10 most influential people in space. He later became the founder of IARPA, the US intelligence community's version of DARPA, as well as president of the SmallSat Alliance, CEO of specialized security company Koandah, and a technology strategy consultant, as well as a board member and advisor for multiple companies. In this episode, we explore the incredible details of Steve's space career journey, as well as the power of curiosity, people, and storytelling in the space industry. Hello.
Hi there. How are you?
Yeah, I'm really good, thanks. How are you doing?
Doing well. Thank you.
Wonderful. Great to connect. I've heard a little bit about you from my colleague Abby and the team. She's said great things about you and that you're very kind of keen to, talk about the space industry and answer any questions that she had. So I'm really excited to kind of get into this today with you.
Yeah, sounds great.
We could, if you don't mind, we could just start at the very
Sure.
beginning of the
Yeah.
early days of Steve Nixon.
Okay.
Perfect. Right. So just to kind of get an idea, just before we go into kind of what you're currently doing at the moment, it'll be great to just get an idea of, where you started in life, where you grew up, school, college, and then eventually how you found your way into your early career.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's get going. So, my parents grew up in Louisiana, which is, very southern U.S., very interesting kind of state. But my both of them, neither of them grew up particularly well off or anything. But my father, it's interesting. He, as he was going through high school, Sputnik happened. The Russians launched the first satellite,
Mm.
and the U.S. government kind of panicked, or the way we always kind of, we became highly sensitive to this, and
Oh,
and they started pouring a lot of money. Like, we need to figure out how to do education in the United States, so this kind of stuff doesn't happen. And he actually benefited from that. So in a way, so he was able to put himself through college as an engineer, chemical engineer, and later became a doctor. But I think
oh,
it's
wow.
interesting that space kind of helped him do that. That probably wouldn't have happened if
Mm.
Sputnik hadn't surprised us like that. But I was born in Texas, and grew up there for a few years. My father joined the military, so we moved around a lot, and we lived in Europe for a number of years in my childhood, from about age 10 to age 13, which was just a phenomenal opportunity for me to kind of see.
Mm.
And we went to England, and London, and it was, just a wonderful highlight of my childhood. But he settled down in Kansas, which is, this state in the middle of the United States known for wheat and and the
Wizard of
Wizard
Oz.
of Oz. And we settled in a little town called Dodge City, which is also kind of famous, at least here,
Yeah, I've heard of
for
that.
gunslingers, in the Wild West, and cattle and
Yeah.
saloons, all that kind of stuff. And so I lived in Dodge City for high school, which is our, you know, so
Yeah.
graduated from there, went to the University of Kansas, and got an engineering degree and a math degree. But at that point, I was looking for, I wasn't sure I wanted to do engineering at that stage, and wanted to just try something. And for whatever reason, I got the bug to, like, I think I'll go try to work at the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. And kind of a funny story is, so how does someone in Kansas get a job in the Pentagon. I had no idea. So I just, back then we had phone books, and I had a phone book for Washington, D.C. at the library or whatever at the school, and just went to the first office in the phone book was the Secretary of Defense. And I just called that number and said, hey, I'm, from, no, I just, kind of described myself or whatever, and said, do you have a job? And they laughed. This is the Secretary of Defense's office. They laughed and they said, no, we don't probably have anything here, but you ought to call this other number. They might. And so I called the other number and I said, hey, the Secretary of Defense's office, said I should call this number, and
you're in.
And I kind of did the whole thing. And finally I got bounced around a little bit. And the Navy actually they said, yeah, we actually do have a position that you might want to put in for. And I did, and I got the job. And so graduating from college, I put all my worldly possessions in, a suitcase and a bag, whatever, and flew out to Washington, D.C. to start, work in the Pentagon as my first job, out of school. So,
wow. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And it was just this kind of crazy, making the phone calls and, I don't know, trying to persuade someone to have mercy or, or to do it. So I spent my first 7 years in the Pentagon working for the Navy. I was a program budget analyst, and we were in charge of the money that would go towards, I was an aircraft analyst. And so, all the, I don't know if you saw Top Gun, but, all the aircraft that the Navy flies on aircraft carriers and otherwise, I was involved in those early, when I was just kind of fresh out of school, allocating money for each of those and defending how much they would all get. So that was great. But it was pretty early on that I realized the reason the Pentagon does a lot of what it does is to convince Congress to give the Pentagon money. And so I said, well, wow, if this whole, thousands of people are here to just persuade Congress to do something, what would it be like to work there, in Congress? And so that was, I started applying to some positions with the House Appropriations Committee. So, we have the House and the Senate, and you have different committees, and the committees that handle all the money are called the Appropriations Committees. And in our Constitution, money can't be drawn from the Treasury except by appropriations. And so these are very powerful committees that kind of have a huge sway over, how the Pentagon works and how the whole government works, really. And so I got one of those jobs. And so I was an analyst. The Pentagon's budget is, I don't know, something like $700 million or more today. But that on these committees, you have about a dozen staffers that are supporting this committee that are overseeing these budgets for the entire Department of Defense. And so it's a neat job that has a lot of influence. And you have these huge portfolios. You have to take 700 million and divide it by 12. I mean, that's, kind of approximately how much each analyst was or staffer was kind of covering. And so I start off doing aircraft stuff there too, but very quickly moved into space. And so I was there for about 10 years, and I was the space guy for most of that, pretty much most of that. And so this is doing both classified, like intelligence space, and less classified military space, and doing both. And I remember being very interested in this because for me, when I first started, it was like, I knew nothing about space. I mean, and it was just like, how does it even work? Where, how does low Earth orbit work, and where are the satellites, and how many do we have in each place, and how does launch work, and all those things. I was just very, very curious about it. And so it was neat. It was neat to get that opportunity. It was kind of something I really was hoping to do, and got to do it. So that was neat. And by the time I was done, and I was in my late 30s at this stage, I was actually, this is just kind of a funny little thing. I was picked as one of the 10 most influential people in space at age, I think, like 39.
Which amazing.
Which is crazy. And that includes like the head of NASA and the head of the European Space
Wow.
Agency, and all
What
these
an
other kind of
achievement.
luminaries. And then little Steve Nixon, is, and it's funny to see the
So
pictures
little,
of everyone.
clearly.
It's all these people with white hair, and then this little kid, so,
Wow, that's
yeah,
incredible.
yeah, that was funny, a little funny thing. But about that time, I guess a little before that, 9/11 happened, and I moved into a lot more of the intelligence side of things. And there's a lot of legislation being written to kind of reformat the intelligence community. And I was part of the groups that helped write that legislation. And there was a creation of the Director of National Intelligence, which is a new office overseeing the whole intelligence community. And after 10 years, I kind of felt like I really had some great experiences and loved the job in Congress, but I heard I had to go do something else at some point, and I thought it'd be really cool to go like be the head of technology for the intelligence community. And so kind of a similar thing, I just tried for it, and I didn't get the top job. I got the deputy job initially, but went over to the newly formed Director of National Intelligence and became, the #2 person for technology across the community. So it's like 17 different agencies and stuff like that. And my boss at the time, who's a great friend of mine, he left the government, and so I became then the Director of Science Technology for the community. And one of the things we did there was create, if you remember DARPA, DARPA is another response to Sputnik. They invented the internet. They invented effectively GPS. They have a long history of stealth, precision weapons. I mean, they've invented, just the internet. Let's just give them credit for the internet. I mean, they, which is pretty incredible. But we wanted to create an intelligence version of that. That was a defense organization, and we wanted to create the intelligence version of that. So we did that, and I was the first acting director of that new organization, and it's still around today. I mean, it's doing great. So hopefully they'll invent the next big thing, someday, which will be pretty amazing. But I left government service in about the mid 2000s, and went off to be a consultant, and which I really enjoyed because I got to work from home and do remote work, years before COVID. So I really enjoyed that, working with a lot of different companies and doing a lot of different things. But one of my great friends went to work for Paul Allen. He was the co-founder of Microsoft. And Paul Allen, there are all these billionaires that were trying to figure out how to, how to go to space. And you had, Elon Musk doing his thing. And I could tell stories about meeting with him at some point. But Paul Allen, co-founder of Microsoft, he was building the world's biggest airplane. That was his take. Sir Richard Branson was doing a whole nother thing. And all these kind of things were happening simultaneously. And but Paul Allen was building the world's largest airplane, and I went to help with that whole thing. And so that got me back in the space business, which was really transforming at the time. And kind of a callback to, you remember when I said I had been voted like one of the influential people in space? One of the write-up is kind of funny, but it was about how I was frustrated at the time with how expensive and difficult and complicated the satellites had become. They were very hard to build. They took forever. They cost a lot of money. And, I said, we got to get back to being agile and quick and doing things. And so we should be building smaller satellites. And the Air Force would have no interest in that whatsoever back then. But what happened is, since the commercial industry kind of took that on and started building small satellites and kind of revolutionizing space from that standpoint. And so it was a few years ago that the same friend of mine that I went to Stratolaunch, he and I both left it eventually. This is the big airplane thing. We set out to create the SmallSat Alliance, which was to promote these small satellites that had been developed in the commercial world to bring them back to DoD, which was a dream that goes back to when I was in my 30s, to that time frame where we were trying to do it then, and we just had no success whatsoever. But that's kind of, is this okay? I mean, I can keep going and tell you.
I'm fascinated by this. This is the most that is the most incredible kind of you said you didn't know anything about space, and look at where it got you. That's
Yeah,
you
crazy.
in the center, and literally making that phone call and just being
Yeah,
passed around. That is, I can't imagine that happening now, but that is amazing. That is so,
crazy.
what a
It's a crazy
story. What a
run.
story. And
Uh,
like you said, it's kind of how you came full circle, and you were, when you started the SmallSat Alliance, how you were able to, because now that is such a hot topic, because it's making space so much more accessible, so much more sustainable, so much improved in so many ways. And you said you were able to take that to the Department of Defense, who previously kind of had no interest in that, but you are now in a position where you could make them care, I guess.
yeah. Yeah, and so this is about 2018, 2019 is where we are in the story. And even when the commercial industry were developing these small satellites and showed a lot of promise, even then the Department of Defense and the intelligence community, basically the US government, really didn't want to have much to do with it at that time. And so we created this SmallSat Alliance to try to change that. And our dream was to vastly grow the use of small sat capabilities across the US government. That was our dream back then. So what is that, 2018, 2019, that's 4 or 5 years ago, something like that. And I remember then we started walking around and talking to people, and they said things like, the quote that sticks with me is, Steve, this is great. I mean, it's great that the commercial industry is doing this, but I see no relevance with that to what we are doing in national security. And it's just it's kind of like, oh really, I mean, no relevance. And but we set out to recruit folks that did, within government and outside, that would that kind of shared our vision. And there was a guy in Albuquerque, Dr. David Voss, I like to mention. He's another great friend who at that time was running the small satellite office in New Mexico. And he was starting to see, they were starting to do analysis that showed if you added small satellites to the existing architecture. Maybe I should explain what the architecture back then, and almost, and kind of true today too. The U.S. government across the board, it was, go big or go home. I mean, it was all about, can we build the biggest, most exotic satellites and get them into orbit? And they worked great. The satellites were amazing. They last a long time, but they were so complicated and expensive and hard to build that you could only do a few of them. And so you would basically cover the world with architectures that may be 3 or 4 satellites, and that's it. And that worked. I mean, that carried us for like 50 or 60 years. The problem is China and Russia and other countries are developing ways to attack those satellites. And so when you only have 3 of something, you could take out one, and it would devastate. It would be absolutely devastating. And so this was kind of happening at the same time. And we were saying, hey, we got to do something about this, the way we've kind of approached space. It's not good when someone can attack you. And so that's when we said, you could take those same satellites and then add a bunch of small satellites to the architecture. And that completely changes it for an adversary. Now, if they take out one satellite, they took out one satellite. I've got hundreds more, where that came from. Completely changes, the whole conversation about architectures. And that's what David Voss was looking at back then. And he called it the heterogeneous space architecture, which was, the concept was great, but the name needed some help. And so I said, Dave, we got to figure out a different name for this. And so we sat down and for breakfast one day, he was in town or something, and we were having breakfast. And I said, we got to think of another name. I said, well, how about hybrid space architecture? And he said, that's great. And so we ran with that. And then we created this statement of principles of what the hybrid space architecture means. And then we started circulating that with all of our friends in the different space agencies in the US government. And they started giving us like, well, hey, if you just made these changes to the statement of principles, this would be perfect, And so we went through 21 iterations of this. It all fits on one piece of paper and very plain English, and I'm happy to share it with you. But towards the end, we started sending it to the White House, and we started sending it to Congress, and the heads of agencies, the head of, what was then how the Air Force was doing space, would come back with comments, and White House was having we got comments from everyone. And it was soon after that in the media, leaders from the different agencies started saying, our future is the hybrid space architecture. That's where we're going. And and this is just something that we had, I have now pages and pages of quotes from leaders from all, I'm talking NASA and the Space Force and NOAA, which is our weather, they do our weather kind of satellite stuff. The National Reconnaissance Office that does the spy satellites. Across the board, they're all saying our future is the hybrid space architecture. And they would draw talking points right out of this little piece of paper that we had put together, just a couple of years before. And now, just fast forward to today, the Space Force, their imperatives or their tenets for space, the number one is we're going to build smaller satellites. That's number one. And number two is we got to go faster. And it's all kind of this flavor of we are making this radical shift from old space to now we're adopting small satellites. And that's in the space of just a few years that change has happened. And it's just kind of unbelievable. It's so.
That's incredible. That is unbelievable. That is such a, what kind of how you just finished that up, if you taking that back to the comparison at the beginning of your career journey, for someone that said they knew nothing about space, that is incredible. That is such a huge impact that you've had on the industry, which has now been, we're all in agreement that it's the future. I think now, I don't think there's anyone that thinks we need to be sending up these big, bulky, expensive
this is only like
satellites.
3 or 4 years old. This agreement that we all have is only a few years old. I mean, it's just
wow,
crazy. And there's another one that I think you'll probably like as well. So this was it was about a year ago where pretty much all the committees in Congress, the White House, all these agencies were bought into this idea of hybrid space architecture. And sometimes they get tired of saying it and they call it different things, but it's all the same stuff. And but we said, what is it that we could do? What should we do now? Now we've kind of persuaded everyone that this is the right thing to do. And we said, well, what would be a big enabler for this vision of the hybrid space architecture? And the answer that we kind of came to is we need a space internet. If you had a space internet, then anytime you launch something new, it could immediately plug in to this information network. The way, when you buy a new phone, the minute you walk out of the store with it, you turn it on and it works. You're like plugged in, immediately. Or you buy a computer, you just put in your Wi-Fi password and you're now in. But we needed that in space. But back then, this is about a year ago, the idea of space internet sounded kind of hokey or weird or whatever. And so let's think of it. We got to think of a catchier title or just something that, would catch people's imagination. So we actually had a contest, and this was a year ago about now, where we said, okay, let's name the space internet. And we went through a couple rounds, and we invited anyone who wanted to play, came in. And the one that came back was was outernet. And so think of the internet being inside the atmosphere and outernet being outside the atmosphere. And so we went to Congress and said, hey, we need to create this space internet that we're calling the outernet. And the Space Force needs to play in this and be part of it. But it's a big commercial thing, just like the internet. And a month later, Congress wrote back and said, yes, we need to go do the outernet. And so,
wow.
And then immediately after that, the Space Force came out with articles saying we are going we're going full out on the outer net, and so this stuff just has happened, one thing after another. It's been just a really incredible journey and happening so fast. Space had been the same for like generation after generation, like 50 or 60 years, and has now pivoted in just a period of 3 years to this new thing. It's so I hope that for the people, for the people that would, take the time to listen to this or whatever, it's an exciting time. It's a time of kind of reinvention, I guess you could say, or transformation, particularly for young people. I think, imagine, even 7 years ago, a young person coming into space, they would have been faced with, like in government space, I'm going to go work on this satellite that may take 15 years to develop and launch. And I'm not going to last, people aren't going to last for all 15 years. They may stay on it for 2 years or something like that, and see some little piece of that satellite for 2 years, and then read about it launching, years later. Well, today, in 2 years, you're going from contract award to launching satellites. And so young people coming in the industry today see the whole thing, and they have much bigger vision of what's happening in that satellite than it would have been, even a few years ago. So it's a really exciting time to get in this industry right now, I think.
Yeah, completely. We completely agree. And I think especially what you're saying there with satellites, I know what I know about kind of microsats and small sats and CubeSats. I know that like you're saying, the kind of the design and the development, the creation, the kind of the deployment window is, I used to know this statistic, but I've completely forgotten it, on how much shorter that process is. It's just mind blowing. It's incredible. And like you said, it's in such a short amount of time. And I think transformative is the exact right word. And you're completely right. There's never been a better time to join the industry. And, we touched on a minute ago, this big shift in the industry. And, a huge part of that is, kind of, as we kind of said, is demystifying the space sector, making it accessible to everyone, and ensuring that, a huge part of making space accessible is ensuring that we kind of nurture the skills and the talent that the industry needs to succeed and grow as these incredible developments that, even 5 not even 10, 5 years ago, people
Right.
hadn't even thought about it yet. So
Right.
this kind of brings me on to something that I wanted to ask you about, because personally, us at EVONA, we think that, to be kind of impacting this change and to make sure that the sector has kind of the people and the skills within it that it needs to kind of keep up with itself in the rapid speed that it's expanding. We think that a huge part of that, and something that we really try and do in our work, everyone at EVONA is a STEM ambassador. We kind of go into schools and we speak to primary and secondary schools and get people and these young people and these really young children, even when we're going to primary school, thinking about space and the importance of space, and kind of even challenging. I know we get some pushback from children who have read things on Reddit or wherever they get this information from, saying that, space is pointless and what are we doing? We need to think about life on Earth. And it's kind of opening their eyes to, this is improving life on Earth, and we're doing it from space. So that's something that we really try and do. And I really would love to kind of know your thoughts on what you think we could be doing differently across the industry, and kind of at that STEM or STEAM, if you want to start bringing the arts into it, at that kind of younger level, to kind of be inspiring these young people and impacting positive change to ensure the growth of the sector in the future.
Yeah, it just reminds me somehow of when my daughters were in grade school, young, they went to a Montessori school, and I forget what the situation was. I guess no, my wife was the Girl Scout leader, for the troop of girls in the school, and she invited me to come after school and show them something about space, and I think I forget how it all evolved, but it was about GPS and how does GPS work, which is actually a very complicated thing, but I brought chalk and string, and we drew out, like if you have this satellite, this satellite, this satellite, each of them are, we drew out the little chalk lines, and between three, all those little chalk lines crossed at one point, and that's, and I kind of described that's how you know where you are, because the three satellites are putting out this signal that all cross at this point. And it was, it was just fun with the chalk and the string. I think, anyone would love doing that. But I think there are probably ways to take, pretty complicated things and bring them to the chalk and string, level of, understanding. And I think it's just, people in space, it's different. It's very different. None of us really have, well, except for astronauts, probably have firsthand experience of being in orbit or something like that. And so, how do you take that abstraction and bring it back to regular people? And I think there are fun ways to do it. And it's, you got to wave your arms around a lot, and and
very
and
engaging.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think that's very important. And but I think it's happening. I think there are a lot of people very inspired by space. You just look at how many space startups you have today, and I think people are just very excited about it. Even, it's amazing how many small launch companies are being started, when you already say, well, but we already have dozens and dozens. Why is there another one? I think people are just that excited about, finding that better mousetrap and finding a better way to do it. So it really is an exciting time. I think it's an exciting time for young people. I think it's more accessible now. The smaller satellites, I think, make it more accessible, because there's just more of them. There's just more, it's just around us more than it used to be.
Yeah, absolutely. I really love that analogy of the chalk and the string, and you and your wife kind of teaching the Girl Scouts about that. I think that is so spot on, and you've really hit the nail bang on the head there, because these concepts can be, even before I joined EVONA, to be completely honest, some of these concepts were slightly alienating to me, and I thought, oh well, I'm no rocket scientist, I don't know. I thought, oh, maybe am I going to be able to understand this? But when you kind of break it down into more simple terms, you can, it's breaking it down into kind of understandable, accessible terms. You could take that to a child and you could ignite something in them. They could go on to do some incredible things. And it's really just giving them that hands-on experience and that chance to really kind of, see that they could do it themselves. Like, I know we go into primary schools and we have children kind of with cardboard cutouts building little satellites, and we teach them about that. And I think that their brains are just like a sponge. And I think if you can engage them in the right way and not just, be reading out of a textbook and pointing to words on a whiteboard or whatever, if you give them this hands-on experience, which is so much more reflective of how exciting and innovative the sector is, I think that is such a great way to kind of ignite the passion and excitement that is reflective of what people have and what they could have to look forward to, in the industry, if they give themselves the chance, and if we kind of open up their eyes and show them that it is completely possible.
You remind me of another little funny story. I'm just now being reminded of these things going back. But I used to do a lot of hiking with, family and nephews and nieces and stuff. And when we're hiking, they would get me to tell them stories about, whatever. And I started on this little series of stories about Odyssey 2000. And this was a satellite. This is a story about a satellite. And the satellite would just go through adventures, adventures in space. But I would tell it I wouldn't tell them I told them it was like real. This really, Odyssey 2000 actually exists, and then we go through, the Odyssey through 2000 was going through the sun at some parts of the story and doing all kinds of these adventures. But for me, it was just a way to pass the time as we're hiking and having a good time and entertaining people. What's funny about it, though, is it wasn't until years later they came back to me and they said, Uncle Steve, Odyssey 2000 wasn't real, was it? To me, this is just like, it's like, no, I mean, yeah, I mean, they were just stories, and they're like, oh man, for years we thought this was real, and one of my nephews had constructed like this scale model of Odyssey 2000 based on the description from these stories,
Oh,
and took it into his class as show and tell to brag about Odyssey 2000 and all his, his uncle was involved in this Odyssey 2000 thing or whatever, and so he went into the classroom and was describing some of these adventures of this satellite. And it just,
that's
yeah,
so
I had
sweet.
no idea. It was just, these are just dumb stories, to tell while you're passing the time hiking around. And for them, it became so real and so, like a part of their, they tell me now, I mean, this was like, they would leave these, and with this Odyssey 2000 was a big part of their lives or something.
Oh, I really hope that when they found out that wasn't real, I hope they found out on their own terms and it wasn't when they were presenting to their class. When
Oh
did
no,
they
I don't
find
think so.
out?
I think it just kind of, it's like Santa Claus or something, they just kind of,
Oh,
it just kind of, figures it out after a while or something. But
yeah. Well, it just shows though how much of an impact it had on them and how kind of inspired they were to hear that.
I think storytelling is important, being able, sharing stories about whatever, it's, there's something about humans that it just sticks with us, and it becomes, it's its own kind of reality or something that really impacts people. So maybe that's it. Maybe, if the space professionals, as they, if they could get better and better at telling the story of space, that's probably very important, I guess, now that I think about it.
Mm,
How do we tell
absolutely.
the story
Well,
of space? Make it engaging and entertaining, and yeah, I think that.
completely. Well, maybe one day they'll be sat here having a conversation and someone will be asking them how they got into the space industry. And they say, oh, my Uncle Steve told me about Odyssey 2000 and I was so inspired and I went home and I couldn't stop thinking about it. And then, we'll leave out the fact that it isn't real. That's really upset me.
I
That's
wish I could say
heartbreaking.
they went into space. They didn't. They all were. They went into STEM though. I will say that.
Oh, what
They
did they
all
do?
they all went in. Um, you know, Engineering. They all became engineers, but computers and doing different kinds of things. Not space related, but definitely STEM. So yeah.
Would you say that was your influence at all? Because I know you weren't necessarily always working, you do have kind of experience with the technologies as well. Do you think they were inspired to kind of hear about what the work you were doing and wanted to follow in your footsteps?
That's probably taking too much credit. I don't know. I mean,
A bit,
who knows? Who
maybe.
knows? Maybe I don't. I mean, maybe, but who knows?
I think that's a huge thing. I think that's
I could go back and ask him. I could ask him, but
because I'm sure that's one of the main drivers of people joining STEM fields is a family member who works in kind of any, I think it is specifically the statistic I saw was within space, but I think it does spread, it's true across all of STEM. I think it is a huge kind of impact and driver of kind of getting people into the sector. But that is, then sometimes on the other side of the fence of that, what does that mean for people who don't have that kind of that figure to look at or someone who could kind of point them in the right direction? And this brings me on to kind of, I guess, a two-part question on in kind of the same note. So, with people that are listening to this, in terms of kind of making it a teachable moment, and we've heard about kind of your incredible journey and the stops along the way, and how your, as you said, curiosity, you said it yourself, just kind of led you, and really putting yourself out there and making those phone calls and taking initiative, really, really got you to an incredible place today. And so kind of alongside that, what would you say were kind of the best resources that you have identified and utilized over the years, whether that's, courses or mentors or programs that kind of helped you to transition into where you are today? And then kind of on in the same kind of arm of that, what advice would you give to someone from, well, importantly, from either a technical or I'd like to kind of bring in a non-technical background, because that's a huge part of kind of space expanding as it is, here's me. I have an English literature and writing degree, and I'm working in the space industry.
Yeah.
And that's a huge thing that we're kind of trying to open people's eyes up to, is that you could work in, you could be an artist, you could be a lawyer, you can be a psychologist, you can be a doctor, you could artist, anything you want to do is, it's available for you. So yeah, what advice would you give then to someone, because that's the second part of the question, to looking to transition?
Um, I something you just said there triggered something that was, I think, I just want to bring up before I forget it, which is
Please do.
the SmallSat Alliance. We sponsored a essay contest, and what was interesting about this, in my mind, was it had two tracks. There was a track, the technical track, write an essay about something, from a technical standpoint. These would be the engineers. These would be like the classic space people that you would always think of. But there was another track. I think this is what was the thing that I think is most special about this, is there was another track that said, for those that are not in the technical side of things, also write essays, from a different perspective. Maybe it's a policy perspective, maybe it's a legal, or maybe it's some a business, a money thing, or whatever it is, but not the engineers, but everyone else, everyone who's not an engineer, write about space as well. And I think that was it wasn't my idea or anything. It was my partners in this, but I think it was a very inspired idea to do that. And I think it's very meaningful to me. And I think, you're a great example of that, someone that, didn't come through the engineering way, but is now in space. I think that it's, because this is a much bigger thing than engineers. And there's lots of room, and we need lots of help from a lot of different players. So there's that. But you had the heart of the question, which I got. There's something about how would people go about getting into the business? I think for me, I think, and you hit it, this curiosity was always a driver for me. I'm just curious about whatever it is, space in this case, and the people that helped me it was really more, rather than books and things like that, which in space are kind of tricky, I would say. And people, I think, talking to people that do space was how I got to understand space. And I would say, but today, gosh, I'm a frequent user of now YouTube for all kinds of things. YouTube is a pretty incredible resource to learn about things. And, if you, whatever we had an idea of, whatever question we might have about space, there's a YouTube video of someone who's doing probably a pretty great job explaining it. And so that's a resource that's out there. So I would say either find someone who is in the industry that will talk to you about it, or, this new thing that we all have now that's just an amazing tool. This YouTube is another resource out there.
Absolutely. I really have to agree with you there, very specifically on the YouTube thing, especially people, as I said, kind of when I joined, I thought, oh God, is it a bit overwhelming? But, not overwhelming, but intimidating really is the word. But as soon as you start having these conversations with people, you just realize that everyone is just a normal person who grew up loving Star Wars and, being really inspired about space and hearing these stories about space. And they're just so eager. The amount of stuff I know about space, I'm no rocket scientist, I'm not claiming to by any chance, but from someone that is really not a technical person at all, I even when I'm at the weekend with my friends, I'm teaching them about, I say, oh, how, GPS. After I remember I spoke to Patrick Shannon from Trust Point, and I just kept telling him about how, satellites and GPS, it's how much it's advancing, and it's just so interesting. And like we said, it's kind of when people speak to you and not dumbing it down or in simple terms in any sense, but kind of in just like just a base level, and just communicating that passion, and especially the YouTube thing. I remember in my first week at EVONA, I remember I asked for a list of topics that I'd be, that would be coming up and that I'd be writing about. And I remember sitting there for the best part of a week. And at first I was reading articles, but I'm a very visual person in the way that I like to learn. I need kind of that combination of, hearing things and, hearing someone and seeing someone kind of be more visual with it. And I think I've watched every what is a payload, what is X, Y, and
Right,
Z
right.
video on YouTube. And it's really, you're completely right in that that is such an invaluable tool, because I think it stuck so much in my head having those people really, even if they've got, the a whiteboard behind them where they're kind of explaining it. And it's just such an incredible way to get that information, but also be engaged visually. And it really sticks it in your mind, I think, a lot more than if you were to, as you said, just to read a textbook
Yeah,
and
you
think
read
to
in
go
a
about it
book
that
or
way.
something. Yeah, yeah. Space is hard to do in a book, I think.
Mm,
But,
yeah.
and if you ever have a chance to talk to an astronaut, that's a whole nother fascinating thing. I mean,
Oh, I
I'll just
have.
spend hours talking to, how does what's it like, on the space station? What was the launch like? And there are all these little things that you just don't appreciate about how space really works, that you get when you talk to folks about it. It's all, so it's a really interesting thing, very exciting, and not always the way you would think. I mean, it's not always the way, Star Trek or Star Wars.
No,
It's
no,
not
absolutely not.
not exactly that.
No, you're completely right there, because I did I've spoken to Nicole Stott a few times, astronaut and aquanaut, which I am forever impressed by. That is
Yeah.
incredible to me. But we had a double podcast episode with Nicole and Christina Court. And they were talking about, Nicole was talking about kind of her time on the International Space Station and some of the astronaut class that she was a part of. And something that's really stuck in my mind was I cannot remember what the man's name was, but she said about someone that was in her class who was renowned for being really talented at doing spacewalks and was really amazing and kind of graceful with it. And she said that he was a professionally trained ballet dancer, and that's how he met his wife.
Oh,
And
wow.
yeah. And she said it's not kind of about the brute force, and you'd think it was really trying to plant your weight when you're in kind of it's not zero gravity. I've learned this since working in the job. Minimal. Is it minimal? It's not actually
Okay.
zero, is it?
It's I would still call it zero gravity. But
I've
it's not
also zero
it's not
gravity.
that there's, that's another interesting thing. It's not that there's no gravity. It's basically the same gravity, just maybe a little bit less gravity in orbit than it is here. I mean, it's only, they're only a couple hundred miles up, and so it's not
Mm.
that far from here in the scheme of things. But it's that they're spinning around the world. That's what makes it seem like there's no gravity. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's it. Yeah, exactly. But yeah, she said that the way that he was kind of trained as a ballerina, she said that she said it was just incredible to watch him, the way that he was able to kind of maneuver his weight and gracefully move around. And I think that's something that a lot of people you wouldn't cross your mind. But as you said, kind of, I would love to really have a off the record sit down with an astronaut. I want to know what it feels like when you're when you're launching. I want to know the feeling in your stomach. That is what,
Um,
as someone that would love to go to space, that is the one thing. How does it? How do
yeah.
you cope with
What
that
does it feel
feeling?
like? Or next time you ask them about what it's like to be in a spacesuit, because that's a whole thing where
Yeah.
they pump down the pressure. So the pressure in a spacesuit is actually very, very small. And then they compensate that with 100% oxygen. And so that's a whole like process that takes hours for them to, and the reason it has to be low pressure is when you get outside, if it was high pressure, you would not be able to move your fingers. You would just be like this balloon that would just like pop rigid, and you wouldn't be able to
Yeah.
move. They have to keep it really low pressure so that you can still move your fingers. But even then, it's like really hard to move, to move this suit. And I think it's all, and it's like the same thing with scuba diving, where if you don't do all this decompression, you have the high pressure, low pressure stuff going on, that you can get the bends, and so that's the big thing that they're worried about. And so there's all this stuff that goes into that. It's really interesting if you ever get a chance to talk to any astronauts about that.
I'm
Really,
sure
really
I will
interesting.
again. I'm sure I will
You're
again.
going to the
I'm
moon
gonna
is
have
the same thing. I mean, now you're having to like bounce around the moon in a spacesuit, and so how do you keep from getting fatigued? And it changes all kinds of things about your the whole metabol. I mean, all breathing and all that kind of stuff is it's really fascinating. Really, really
yeah,
interesting.
it's so fascinating, and it's really interesting to kind of hear how you know, how I kind of, when I've done some research into this, it's interesting to kind of see how psychology and kind of medicine comes into it as well, because I know there's some issues that people can have when they're up there. And it was really interesting to kind of hear how you can be physically impacted by it as well as mentally impacted, which is, you know, again, going back to kind of the insane and incredible careers that of the not so distant future. And I think a lot of them, you know, space lawyers, there's fully qualified, fully practicing space lawyers in the world. It's not even a, that's not even kind of an idea anymore. That is a reality.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Astronauts, at first they is about the right stuff, who's going to be brave enough and calm enough to get, to go up there on this thing that's, just seems crazy. Today it's about, people who can be up in orbit for a long time and not go crazy. I mean, that's
Yes. Can you live with other people for that long in such an
and live
isolated
with,
space?
two other people that you have to, or whatever it is, just a half dozen other people without driving them crazy and them driving you crazy. I mean, that's basically.
Yeah, completely.
So you have to be like
Absolutely.
really calm and very agreeable, and you have to be able to work things out. So now it's about being, your interpersonal skills and it's kind of, it's all very interesting to me. It's
Yeah,
very.
completely. Because that is what Nicole actually said. She said, you know, that she was disqualifying herself in her head from applying to be an astronaut, and people were going, "Do it, apply." And she thought, "Oh, X, Y, and Z reason I can't." And she said there's a she said that she realized that they really just wanted to know if you were if you would be able to bear it and if you would be bearable when you're up
Right,
there. I know she
right.
definitely said that wasn't all she said, but that was a really interesting part of it because, you know, you would think it was, I think when I was maybe younger, I think it was about strength or brute force. I don't know what I thought you needed to be an astronaut, but that's clearly not the case. And I'm learning more and more now. Maybe, maybe I'll
Or,
see for
how
myself.
are you the best pilot in the world, or are you the, the most courageous pilot in the world? And now it's like, are you technically, you know, excellent at whatever task that, they need you to do out there, but are you also able to get along with people? You know?
Yeah,
Yeah.
completely. That's so interesting. Right. So, Steve, we're coming to kind of the end now, but something, it's been so great to kind of hear about your journey and your, you know, where it's taken you and the stops along the way and the advice you'd give to other people and just kind of, you know, speculate about the incredible things going on in the industry and how, you know, mind blowing it is. So, just the final question that I have for you is just kind of going back, speaking about kind of, you know, your experience with satellites and how you've been so instrumental in kind of, you know, in the creation of these small sats and how they're being implemented further into kind of the industry across the world. Just kind of looking forward, we've looked back and looking forward now. What are your thoughts on, you know, we've spoken about kind of the current state of the, you know, the kind of satellite and the small sat industry, but how do you see this evolving over the next 5 to 10 years?
I think we're in for more exciting times. I think that there's a lot of capability, just 5 years ago, the capabilities that we were projecting to go into space are now actually making it into space. And so the reality is kind of hitting. The space internet, I think, is going up into orbit, and so that's going to create more opportunity to use space in ways that probably never thought of today. I think the industry is probably in for is going to transform. There are going to be winners and losers. Some companies will figure out the cool things and make it work, and other companies are going to miss the boat on that a little bit, and they'll fall off. But I just see space becoming a much, if it's hard to even imagine because it's so thriving right now even. But I think that we're just seeing the beginnings of this next phase in space, that we're just the early stages, and it's just a lot of amazing things in front of us, I think, coming the next few years.
Mm, I
It's gonna be
completely
pretty
agree.
awesome. Yeah.
Mm, absolutely. It's very exciting times ahead. It's thrilling times as it is, but I think only the future really knows what it's going to hold. So I think we're just going to have to stay tuned and
Yeah.
see what
For those,
exciting next
I'll just
development is coming.
one last point for those that think that space is about something elsewhere, and we is the vast majority of our use of space is about looking back at the Earth and servicing needs on Earth. And so it is very much, we even think of it in terms of Earth facing capabilities versus space facing capabilities, and the vast majority of what we do in space all centers on Earth. And then, but there's this science, there's the other things, looking out at the cosmos and all that's all there, the moon and all that kind of stuff. But it's it's a great way to get to know ourselves, get to know our planet in the future too. We're going to get to know it a lot better in the coming years, which is another exciting thing. Yeah.
Absolutely. I completely agree with you there. I think that is one of the most exciting things. And you're completely right there. It's about learning more about the planet, how it's such an incredible tool to be able to look down at our planet from that great height, and with these incredible technologies to look to, it's even as far as, climate monitoring, environmental monitoring, farming, agriculture, ocean monitoring, the ways that we're kind of learning about the planet and learning about like huge, significant real world problems that everyone is really keen on tackling. I think a lot of people, we're all trying to look for these solutions, but I think a lot of people don't realize and don't see space as a potential solution to those problems. So yeah, really
how precious this Earth is, and how thin. I see behind you there's a kind of an image of Earth with that very thin sliver of atmosphere. I mean, that's the only thing that keeps us alive, is that little bit of atmosphere. And we need to take care of that little piece of atmosphere, because that's all that's all that we got. And so it's a precious thing that we need to take care of and watch out for. And I think space helps us do that.
Completely. I completely agree with you. And I think that is a perfect closing point for what has been a great conversation. Thank you so much for joining me, Steve. It's been so great to kind of meet. It's been so great to meet you and speak with us about you. I've so enjoyed this conversation, feeling very inspired about the industry that we work in.
It's been fun. Thank you so much. I really appreciate this chance to talk to you.
Oh, you're very welcome. The pleasure has been all mine. Yeah, really thank you again for your time. And yeah, enjoy the rest of your day. Hope to speak soon.
Okay. Take care.
You too. Bye.